You're good, Beth.
Folks, I'm Beth Whitty, Grant Projects Coordinator for Clinton County Planning. Today's presentation is being brought to you by the Clinton County COVID-19 Advisory Coalition that consists of the Clinton County Commissioners, Commonwealth University Lock Haven, Clinton County Housing Coalition, and Clinton County Emergency Services, Bucktail Medical Center, UPMC, Keystone Central School District, and Keystone Counseling. The series is being made possible by the Health Initiative for Rural PA grant from the Pennsylvania Office of Rural Health. Now, let me tell you a little bit about today's speaker. Dr. Kristen Lee, known as Dr. Chris, is an internationally recognized award-winning behavioral science clinician, researcher, educator, speaker, and comedian from Boston, Massachusetts. As the lead faculty for behavioral science and faculty in residence at Northeastern University, Dr. Chris's research and teaching interests include individual and organizational well-being and resilience, particularly for marginalized and underserved populations. Dr. Chris works with organizations and leaders around the world on how to use the science of behavioral change and human potential to build healthy mental health cultures that help prevent burnout and promote organizational and human sustainability. She's the author of Reset, Make the Most of Your Stress, winner of the Next Generation Indie Book Awards Motivational Book of 2015, best-selling Mentelligence, The New Psychology of Thinking, Learn What It Takes to Be More Agile, Mindful, and Connected in Today's World, and Worth the Risk, Learn to Microdose Bravery to Grow Resilience, Connect More, and Offer Yourself to the World. She's the host of Cracking Up, where therapy meets comedy, and is a regular contributor on Psychology Today and Thrive Global. Dr. Chris's work has been featured on NPR, TED, Fast Company, and CBS Radio. Her TEDx talk, The Risk You Must Take, has 384,000 views. Before we begin, I'll be sharing a short video that talks more about active minds and their incredible impact.
When I was a freshman in college after losing my brother, Brian, my only sibling, to suicide. Active Minds is a national nonprofit organization focused on changing the conversation about mental health. We're most well known for mobilizing young adults to get involved in and change culture around mental health.
We know that life is tough for young adults. And we also know that it's not just the students who have mental illness that have issues, it's all students. We have enough research to know that all students are dealing with things like depression, anxiety, and the epidemic of loneliness.
Active Minds is serving as this institution on a campus that is getting students talking, having programming during Suicide Prevention Month, having stress relief activities during exams, screening movies, having panel discussions and keynote speakers, all with a mental health theme, so that it's not just that we're talking about mental health when there's a crisis, but we're talking about mental health every day.
One of the things I love about our partnership with Active Minds is that they are creative and engaging and relatable. It's just in this easy language, vernacular that you use on a normal. And I think that helps to decrease the stigma. It helps to start the conversation.
I love that Active Minds is able to make the topic of mental health very broad, so that way all people feel included in it.
We were thrilled to start working with the RAND Corporation to understand if Active Minds was really making a difference. It was a longitudinal study.
It has shown that the presence of an Active Minds chapter on a campus, just that alone makes people access counseling more, feel more comfortable.
Those students had lower stigma and improved attitudes around mental health. simply because they felt like their campus cared. That's unparalleled in the mental health field.
It's amazing the progress that this movement is making. I feel that through your work and in the generations to come, you're at a tipping point.
We really see ourselves as the organization that is going to propel change in America around mental health.
They're the leading organization on college campuses. All of our players come from college campuses. So now when you come into the National Football League, guess what? We're going to continue the conversation. We're going to help you to continue the conversation. So no better way to do that than with our partnership with Active Minds.
When Color Street chose to partner with Active Minds, we knew that they had an amazing story to tell. Having a national reach through our network of independent sales associates and customers, Active Minds has given us the language we need to help them get the conversation going in the communities where they are.
I think what Active Minds has done has been an extraordinary contribution to not only college campuses, but as a model for what we can do in civil society to make sure that we look out for each other in the same way that we hope people will look out for ourselves.
The empathy, the knowledge I gained from Active Minds is something that I will carry with me long after graduating from college.
Active Minds has just changed my life. It's something that I'm not sure I would be here without. It was my savior. It was my passion. And it's something that I will never forget.
Active Minds is saving lives. Active Minds is a change maker. Help us as we continue to change the conversation about mental health.
Beth, I want to just thank you and your entire leadership team for inviting me to share with the community. And today I just want to welcome everyone. You know, you just saw obviously a very powerful video, and it focused a lot on the college mental health crisis, but we also know that we're living at a time with a global mental health crisis. And so I'm here today to really share some of the best strategies that we know through modern brain science research and, you know, through best practices in mental health that can help us stay well during complexity. And as has been said, you know, I've spent many years working in communities to really help increase access and awareness, you know, to promote prevention and to help us think about ways that we can cultivate resilience even during complex times. So for all of you who are tuning in live right now, and for those of you who are watching the recording, I want to offer you a wholehearted welcome. I hail from Boston, Massachusetts. I grew up south of Boston in a rural community. My father, a machinist, my mom stayed home to raise the 4 kids. I was the first in my family to attend college. And at that time, I myself was struggling with some disruptions in my mental health, which led me to finally recognize that I needed help. And when I got therapy, I realized that I also wanted to make this my life's passion and my life's work. So I'm really delighted to be here. And today I want to share, you know, obviously whoever's tuning in, we all have different circumstances, things that we're struggling with, that we're curious about, that we're trying to find our way with. And so today I want to actually offer some micro strategies. What we know is that oftentimes small things make a big difference, and they really can help have a cumulative positive effect on our mental health, just like stress can pile up and add up, and it can make us experience a lot of difficult emotions. It can make us sometimes feel lonely or disconnected. So today I want to provide strategies that have been proven and validated to help us stay and do well, even during difficult times. And so today is not a substitute for medical advice, but it will offer the best of what I've learned in my 30 years of service in communities and, you know, really trying to fight the mental health crisis. And as we all know, the pandemic and its aftermath have created a great deal of disruption and discord. And it begs us, I think, for collective action to think about what can we do in our own lives and in our own spheres of influence to make things better. So again, I'm so happy to be here. And I'm going to just share a few perspectives that I have found really helpful to many that I've served along the way and in my own life. So I'll start with this quote by Georgia O'Keeffe, who said this: I've been absolutely terrified every moment of my life, but I never let it stop me from doing a single thing I've wanted to do. I love this quote because it's honest and relatable. I also love Georgia O'Keeffe's art, but I had gone and seen, I went to the Santa Fe Museum, I saw her beautiful art, and then I got curious about her life. And it was said about her that she was a strategic risk taker, that she held certain values in her life, and she was willing to face the difficult circumstances of life in order to live out her passion and purpose. And that really inspired me. And I think this quote really captures it, that for any of us out there, on one hand, we could be doing relatively well, making the best of things, giving our best effort. And on the other hand, we could feel at times flooded with fear or anxiety or overwhelmed with stress. And we might feel like the other shoe's going to drop. We might feel kind of like a hot mess. And all those things are part of our human experience. It's not bad. It's oftentimes just a proportionate reaction to life. So I think, just how do we harness this spirit of being scared and dealing with anxiety, but also being able to persevere and move forward? So with that, I want to share some questions that I think about constantly. And, I worked as a psychotherapist for many years. I've done a lot of community mental health work. I now do a lot of research on human resilience, and I work in higher education and then with communities around the world that are really trying to do what you're trying to do, which is to understand modern mental health and to be able to, move away from some of the old ideas that we have that aren't very helpful. So one question I think about constantly is, how can we protect our mental health during a global mental health crisis? It almost seems out of reach or elusive or difficult because we know there's so much around us that is erosive and it can be damaging and anxiety provoking. So is it even something that we can do? How do we actually protect ourselves from this circumstance of today? And, I also do a lot of work in the realm of burnout. Burnout is being called inevitable, and it's also being called the age of anxiety. So it can cause us to wonder, gee, am I going to just constantly be flooded with stress, or am I just going to be burnt out within, a matter of time? Or are there ways that we can actually protect ourselves against it? And then, similarly, which I kind of alluded to already, is resilience even possible during impossible times? It seems like there's so much coming at us at breakneck speed. There's a lot to contend with. There's a lot of priorities, a lot of moving parts. Change is the only constant, and it can feel like a complete sense of overwhelm. And we wonder, is it even possible to be resilient in this kind of moment in time? So what I've learned is these things are both simple and complicated. There's a lot of discoveries in modern brain science and in the mental health disciplines that show us that small strategic action can make a big difference in our lives. And so what I've seen even as a psychotherapist is that sometimes this just the act of someone listening to us, the act of us feeling seen and heard and valued and not othered or dismissed or stigmatized, that can be very healing and very restorative. Or just getting a little extra sleep in a night, or, bumping up our nutrition or our time in nature, or having a good laugh with a friend. Some of those most simple things in life can really help us. But also mental health is complicated. Modern brain science is showing that we are all likely to vacillate in and out of episodes across our life. So gone are the days where we think, ooh, this person has depression, or that person has anxiety, or they have bipolar. Now we understand it in a much more expansive way. We know that many of us show up with varied symptoms or show up on some point of the spectrum. And that, again, given the circumstances or our genetic predispositions, it's something that is just part of the human condition. Just like we could break a bone or get a cold, we're at risk for mental health struggles across our lifetime. And I think, again, what's really important is that healing and recovery and prevention are always within reach. But a lot of times what I find, especially in my teaching work, a lot of people will say, well, I was never taught that in school, and so this is a moment where we can look again at these frameworks that are very well established that can help us tend to our mental health. So just like we brush our teeth, that's a form of hygiene. There's things we can do for our emotional and mental hygiene as well. So I want to also share that the biggest lie that anxiety and depression tells us is that we are the only ones. I always say, I wish that all the years that I did therapy with people, that they could all be a fly on the wall in each other's sessions. And I wish that in general, I think it's good people are becoming more open about mental health. But I think that the biggest lie it can haunt us with is that it's a moral failing on our part, or it's something to be ashamed of, or embarrassment, or don't embarrass the family name, or don't talk about it, don't bring attention, don't overshare. And yet I think it's ironic because so many of us are dealing with this, whether it's ourselves, our children, our parents, family members, close friends, our partners, our loved ones. We are all touched deeply by mental health and the surrounding issues, whether addiction or, just many, many issues, it all is kind of one big ball of wax. So I think one thing that I would encourage you to think about today is if you might be suffering in these ways, just know that you're not the only one. It's not anything to be ashamed of, and that help is within reach. So as I mentioned before, when we look at ourselves in today's light, in today's context, burnout has been reclassified and called inevitable. And so what happened is in 2019, the World Health Organization, so they're massive, they're the kind of the end all be all, the mecca of, really presenting important calls to action around health. They basically said that burnout is not like it used to be categorized as a health condition. They recategorized it as a condition of the modern workplace and of modern living. Now, the minute I might say that, some of you may be in the workforce and you're thinking, yeah, my job, it's kind of a mess, it's kind of wild, it's a little bit of a circus. Or, you might be in a situation where you are in the front lines of the mental health crisis, or you've been in the front lines of COVID or leadership or service. And in what I said really resonates, that it really feels like a response to the stressors, the pressure to do more with less, just the increased demands of technology and always having to sign on and answer emails within breakneck speed. And then some of you may have also thought it's technology, it's information overload. We're calling it infobesity, the fact that we take in the equivalent of 174 newspapers a day. So our minds are not meant to take, we're not machines or computers, but we're being called to sort of function as if we were. If you're a parent, for example, you might be in a situation where you feel so much pressure and you feel so worried about your kids and you're trying to super parent them, or in the workforce, you're afraid, you don't want to lose your job. So you're push, or you're in the service of people and you don't want to let them down. And there's a lot of stake in this world. So there's a lot of reasons why burnout was changed to indicate that we need to pay attention to our environments and how they're affecting us. And then, what boundaries we can set and what protective factors we can leverage in order to protect ourselves. So, partly why I mention all this is because a lot of times I know this as a person who not only has researched and treated and provided support on the front lines of the mental health crisis, but as a person with a lived experience, sometimes we get a visit from that toxic inner critic that tells us, you're the only one, you should just try harder, suck it up. Don't let anyone see you sweat unless it's to show off your hot yoga class. And, there's just these pressures that sometimes we can face when we struggle. But it's important to realize that we are all subject to these risks in today's world. And it's happening across the globe. And, I'm so honored to serve you as a community, because I know that from a data perspective, right now we're dealing with a critical shortage of mental health workers. Sometimes I'll put it like this: it's harder to find a therapist than it is, it's like trying to find a wrinkle on Kim Kardashian. It's very hard to find a therapist. It's very hard to find care. And that's why this whole initiative was sponsored, to create conversation, honest conversation, research-driven conversation conversation from, all of us Active Minds who have these lived experiences and have a deep passion for help spreading this message that it's okay not to be okay, but we don't have to stay stuck. And we're not alone when we suffer. It's not our fault when we suffer. So another big issue of today is there's a lot of polarization. We could look at socio-political polarization. You just have to go on Facebook for a minute and you see the fighting and the discord. We see fighting happening in families and across political lines, and cancel culture. There's just a lot of negativity and a lot of angst and anger and frustration. And one thing I want to encourage everyone is, just like fear and hatred and germs and misinformation can spread, so do integrity and wisdom and loving kindness. And so that's a piece of this too. If we're thinking about protecting our own mental health, when we think about it in that way, it helps us have a lens of healing within and healing throughout our community, and really being that beacon of light, that person who's thoughtful, that is, not quick to be judgmental or antagonistic, and realizing that a lot of money is made through the news media and social media when people are at odds with each other. And so if we can kind of step back and realize that, it can help us be less inclined to take the bait and get really frustrated and kind of get in the throes of it. And a lot of times that can be unproductive. When there's just a lot of negativity, we don't often find common ground or be able to move forward in a better place. So I really want to mention this because I think it hurts a lot of people, and it's part of the mental health crisis. Also, loneliness is being called the new smoking. I call it the new Marlboro on this slide, right? So, that's a really telling statistic and data point that so many people are feeling isolated and lonely. Obviously, we saw waves of this through the pandemic and through the social distancing. But even before that, we're dealing with a lot of fragmentation in society, people being busy, in the rat race, as my dad used to say. And we just are sort of in that frenetic go, go, go energy. And it's hard to find time to connect. Sometimes we might, not have people that live with us or people that we can connect with. We might have estranged family. There's all kinds of ways that, create loneliness. And then similarly, sometimes we can have a lot of people around us, but still feel like misunderstood or like a misfit, or that no one understands us. And by the way, that can actually be a condition of struggling with mental health. We can feel, if we're dealing with depression or anxiety, social anxiety is the fastest growing anxiety spectrum disorder. A lot of us feel really uncomfortable in social situations, or if we're feeling down on ourselves, it can be really hard to make healthy relationships and to feel of value. And that can be hard then to feel like we want to put ourselves out there. Another factor that can kind of get in the way of getting help is a lot of times, and maybe some of you who are teachers, educators, nurses, physicians, leaders, parents, caregivers, that volunteer in the community that cares for people, or you're just that kind soul, you always want to lend an ear and be that person who's really comforting and empathic. It's a lot of times much easier to give that help than to actually cry uncle and say, we need it too. And so I'm wondering, for any of you that are listening, if you relate to this, if you're like, yeah, I'd much rather give help. I don't like to ask for help. Now I have a colleague, and she's from Texas. She's kind of, really kind of staunch, gritty person. And she's very, very giving and very kind. And she shared a story with me about when she broke her leg. It was, she lives by herself. She does everything herself. And it was such a shift to actually have to ask people over to like help her switch her laundry or make a meal and do those basic tasks. And I think that's something too for any of us that kind of pride ourselves on being, really independent and strong. Or if we typically can, cope fairly well, and all of a sudden we start having panic attacks, or we go through a death or a loss or a divorce or some other traumatic event. And, the pandemic, so many people say, I just don't feel myself. I haven't gotten back to myself. So it can be really hard to ask for help. But my point really is that it's important that we learn to do that. So another quote from the World Health Organization that I also really wanted to share today And this is really just to sort of get us in the mindset. And then I'm going to be sharing a lot of strategies. You know, a lot of these things I'm talking about, you may know already, and you might be wondering, what do I do? So this is just almost a takeaway to remember that there's no health without mental health. There's no success without mental health. Our mental health is more important than, you know, likes on our feed, if you're, you know, on social media, or money in the bank, or letters after our name, or status, or what people think about us. You know, mental health is the most important thing. And again, there's a lot that can come at us and compromise it. So speaking of that, I'd like to share some framings about resilience. And before I do that, I'm curious, and I would like you to take a minute to reflect and think about, when you hear the word resilience, what do you think of? So maybe your grandparents taught you something about it, your parents, you heard something about it on a podcast, or, you know, you've heard a lot about resilience. It's a very popular word of today. So think in your mind, what are some things you think about? Maybe something like bouncing back, or perseverance, or agility, or being tough or strong. So when you think about your associations with resilience, I want to share some things that the research talks about. And I love these words. You can tell, as a, you know, I'm a writer. As Beth said, I've written many books about resilience, and I love words and language because they really help us to pinpoint what we can do. So resilience is defined as a buffering process of positive adaptation while and after enduring adversity. Okay. Now notice I didn't say it's something you're born with or you're not. It's a process. It's something that we can actually invest ourselves in order to maximize it. So resilience also relies on leveraging what's called protective factors. Protective factors are the presence of people, activities, and resources in our lives that help our mental health. So, for example, green space. If you live in a place where there's nature, that has been cited as being really helpful. Getting off our screens, getting outside. We all know the power of a beautiful sunrise or sunset, or just the beautiful smell of maybe like a, you know, the water, or, you know, the smell of rain. We also know that people are protective factors. The presence of people who care, that we can be ourselves with, that aren't going to put us down or be mean, that care about us, that support us, that really are cheering on our well-being. We also know things like libraries, reading, podcasts, getting information on mental health. Those are protective factors. And we know especially that relationships matter, you know, and that could be with family or loved ones, people we know in the community, even sometimes interactions with strangers have been shown to help us. But we know that isolation is really what gets in the way of mental health and developing resilience. Resilience is also a mindset that we as humans can endeavor, meaning that we can take on certain activities, mindsets, habits, and behaviors to nourish ourselves and protect ourselves. So again, it's not something years ago we'd think like, oh, you know, you're either strong or you're not, you're either gritty or you're not. But now we see it as something that we can work to change and renegotiate our beliefs and, you know, have mindsets, and not just sort of like feel good pop psychology, toxic positivity stuff, but actually things that we can say and do in times of distress to continue on. I also want to emphasize, if you remember 2 words from today, help helps. Really, it's one word, just one has the S, right? Help helps. So there are promising advances in treatment. I know that it can be difficult to find treatment, but we do have telehealth. There are a lot of things available out there. There's a lot of communities, including Active Minds, with a lot of resources. So many times when we're in the throes of distress, of darkness, of depression and anxiety, it's very hard. It's like a blinder. It's very hard to see that. But I want to remind everyone that there are tremendous advances in treatment, and people are opening up. You know, we're not living in the 1950s where, it was very hush hush and people had to stay in the shadows. People are overwhelmingly acknowledging the difficulties of the times and how they are being affected. And that awareness and openness and candor is also a protective factor within a community. So even for yourself, I have the privilege, I had these mental health struggles myself, and I get to talk to lots of folks all the time. I have a very, robust public platform. I write, I put books out. So I have a lot of folks I can get this word out to. But don't underestimate the power just sharing with your neighbor, hey, I think you should talk to someone, or these resources have helped me, or I've gone through that too. That can be the birthplace of a real bonding moment, and it can be a big relief. You never know, that could be a lifesaver or a life changer. And I know I have so many examples of that where I felt embarrassed to tell what I was feeling. And then once I did, other people were like, thank you so much for saying that. That's exactly how I felt too. And it created a lot of connection. It didn't make me feel bad. It made me feel better. So I think when we're open about help, that we all need it, that we all suffer, it's not stigmatized mental health condition, it's human condition. We all need help at different times and in different ways. And it's not something that we're doing wrong. It's just part of the perils of living, and across time, history, culture, across the world, everybody takes their turn suffering. So I've mentioned, we have to throw out some old ideas about mental health. And so to that end, I want to share a quote that I think really captures this and that I love, by Alvin Toffler, who said this: "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." And that's really what I want to encourage today. Wherever you're situated, you may be in a care facility, you might be at the library, in a school, you might be 10 years old, you might be 100 years old. My grandmother lived to 103. So anyone out there, I applaud you and your resilience. You are the embodiment of that. But wherever you're situated, if you're really worried about family members or friends or partners, just know that there's a way through, even when it feels hopeless. So I wanted to share some myths and micro strategies with you. So the first myth about mental health and resilience, I've kind of built up to this, but I call it the antiperspirant and bootstraps theory 101. And this is my comedic side, but the idea, never let anyone see you sweat, suck it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We don't see any evidence of that in modern brain science or in resilience research that says that helps. Making people feel worse about their issues usually is not a way, for them to feel comfortable to get help. And again, just remembering that it's not just about pretending and being stoic and being tough. A lot of times it's about being vulnerable and open and candid to say, I can't do this anymore, or I need help, or we got to figure this out. So that actually is really a resilient behavior, not pretending we're just fine, even when we're not. Myth number 2, a lot of times we feel very unresilient. So the myth is, I don't feel resilient, I don't feel bold, I don't feel courageous, I don't feel strong, so I must not be. But those are just raw emotions. Those are just feelings, right? Just because you feel exhausted, overwhelmed, afraid, anxious, that doesn't mean that you're not resilient. It just means that you're having a reaction to your environment, or you're struggling. You could even have gone through something really serious and you are just reacting in a very human way to that. So even in moments where we feel kind of shaky or wobbly, it doesn't mean that we're not resilient. Myth number 3, a lot of times when we're really, really overwhelmed, we think it's going to take a lot to get us back on track. So sometimes we think it's going to take grand gestures or heroic feats to prompt change. I work with so many people in therapy and they're like, I know I need to eat better. I know I need to sleep better. I know I need to do this. And then they feel frustrated. We call it cognitive dissonance in psychology, because what they want to do is a mismatch with what they actually do. And I think what happens is sometimes we start off too ambitious with too lofty of goals. Sometimes we need to go tiny and scale it back and start with the smallest thing that's doable and then gain momentum from there. So, you know, a lot of us would love it if we could take a 7-week vacation or, you know, have all the time in the world to be in nature all day or deep breathe. But that's not the reality of our lives. We may only have very thin slices of time to invest in our resilience. And so therefore, I want to really show you some small ways that will have big impact for you. So before I do that, I want to share another myth, which is that people often will say, I feel selfish, I feel bad, I feel guilty when I take time for self-care. Or we think it's kind of like a little fluffy, a little kumbaya, a little superficial, like, oh, is it just mani-pedis or salt baths and chocolate cake or me time? So sometimes we think it's just a lot of that stuff that comes through social media. Sometimes too, when we're really stressed out, we're having mental health difficulties, we think this isn't going to work. There's no way out. And then another major issue of today is having time. There's a lot of distractions. There's a lot that's commanding our attention. There's a lot of priorities. There's a lot of hard work at hand. And it's very difficult sometimes to juggle it all and actually have time to invest in our well-being. So I want to now share, again, to that point, micro strategies, small things that we can do to help mitigate the risks and consequences of burnout and mental health distress. So the first I've said already, we need to ban the 1950s hangover, the idea that it's a moral failing if you struggle, that you just need to deal with it, don't be such a crybaby. We need to understand again that it's part of our shared humanity to suffer, and no one is at fault when that happens, and that help helps and that we can access it. Micro strategy number 2 is setting boundaries and making mental health our #1 priority. No one's going to stand up at your funeral and say, oh, you know, they answered their email and text messages in 0.2 seconds, or they had all this money or all this fame. That's not what our legacy is. We want to live a life of meaning, connection, of impact, and of well-being. And so therefore we need to set boundaries. We need to learn the power of a 2-letter word, which is no. We need to be able to carve out time to breathe and to relax, even if they're small pieces in our daily lives. And we need to know that even if we're not feeling like our mental health is on edge, it still needs to become a priority, like regular hygiene. And, you know, this is a moment you've decided to tune in, and you might be thinking of yourself or people that you love or that you support, right? But we all know that it has to be on the list. It can't just be passive. We have to ritualize it and make it part of our routines in order to build it. Okay, so this strategy I talk about in my most recent book. The book is called Worth the Risk. And I wrote this book during the pandemic, and I was really heartbroken. I was working with a lot of people who were suffering. I was suffering myself through a major family crisis. And it was just so hard to be down and to just kind of constantly say, well, what if the pandemic never ends? Or, be in fear all the time? Or what if this person comes into leadership? Or what if this, or what if that, or, what's going to happen? And what psychology research shows is that when we focus on what is true, what is possible, what is good, what we can control, it's called locus of control, that helps us to stay well. It allows us to direct our attention in productive ways rather than just stewing and marinating in all kinds of fear and what ifs and anxiety and mental gymnastics. So focusing on what is. So even for ourselves, you might say, oh, I'm so down on myself. I have all these things I want to work on and I'm not doing well. Well, what else is true? What are you talented at? What are you doing that is working? And stopping and celebrating that and not just focusing on what isn't happening. That can really help us build momentum and see ourselves with greater self-compassion and see our others that way. Speaking of which, micro strategy number 4 is moving from me to we, knowing we're not the only ones that are suffering, and knowing that as we work to improve our own well-being, then we're going to have more opportunity to influence those around us as well. And this is also about human solidarity, caring for one another and really having that deep lens of, human reverence and regard. Strategy number 5, sometimes we think that serious problems require serious interventions. And that can be true, but it's also important to make sure that creativity and fun do not go missing in action. I know this as I'm a behavior scientist and I'm also a comedian. I love comedy. I love humor. Humor is overwhelmingly cited as a protective factor for our mental health and creativity. You know, they call it psychological flow when we can get lost in time and space. Maybe you like making crafts or cooking or woodworking or, you know, noodling, doing things in the yard, projects, or just drawing or painting or poetry or writing. All those things create what are called psychological distance from the things that bother us. Okay, so when we have fun, we're toggling away from stress, we're moving away from it, and we're getting into something that lets our brain and our body and soul know we're okay, and that there are beautiful moments in life for us to take part in. So don't think that it all has to be hard work. In fact, when it comes to behavior change science, we know that when we infuse creativity and fun with the things we're trying to do to change and to improve our mental health, it actually sticks. It makes it work better. Micro strategy number 6, I mentioned this word before, practicing human reverence and what I call in my writing collective efficacy, which is that when you do well, I do well. And when you hurt, I hurt. And an injury, issue, problem to anyone is one for all of us. You know, it's this idea that we're all connected. We're not just out for ourselves, our own glory, our own gains, but we care about one another as fellow humans. And research shows that when we work to spread compassion, it not only helps those that we're spreading it to, but it edifies and nourishes us. So in my work, I also talk about a concept called psychological safety. And it just basically means that we feel that we are in company, the company of, or in community or places, we work to create them where we feel like we can be ourselves, where we feel we're not going to get berated, penalized, punished, put down, othered, cast aside, made fun of, but we feel like we can be ourselves and that people accept us and care for us. We know that whether it's in a work environment, a community center, any kind of place, any family, any home, we know that we need a sense of safety and a sense of belonging where we feel that we belong and that we matter, that our voice, our identity, who we are matters, our story matters. Those things are all very protective towards our well-being. So some takeaways for today, and I just want to thank you. I'd give anything to be able to meet each of you one by one and to hear your stories and to think about the incredible resilience that you have as a person. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to tune in. And I want to really encourage you to always remember micro strategies add up and that help helps. So double dip these strategies, take them for yourself, spread them with your friends, your family, your community, those you're serving. These are for everyone of any age, any circumstance, any walk of life. Everywhere we go, we know the research shows that we all are subject to mental health suffering, but that these types of things that we do, again, these habits, these mindsets, these behaviors, we can build resilience. Now, today I have mentioned in many ways that we need to be mindful. We need to be aware of contextual risks. What does that mean? It means if burnout is being called inevitable, if loneliness is being called the new smoking as a health risk, if people are struggling, they say 1 in 3 of us have clinically significant anxiety. If mental health issues are being reported at skyrocketing rates, we need to understand these are the risks of modern living. And believe me, generations past had to deal with mental health issues with very little access to treatment or knowledge or resources. So it's not new. It's just that now we are seeing more reporting. We're seeing certain factors in today's world take over. And what we need to do again is get more comfortable with the uncomfortable and recognize it's not our fault and we need to band together and get help. Now, another underlying principle in my presentation today is our ability to maintain a trauma-informed lens. What this means is that we have all gone through significant trauma in our lives. Every person has all kinds of shapes and sorts of trauma. And in particular, the pandemic was very traumatic. It caused us a lot of isolation, a lot of loss, a lot of heartache, a lot of fear, all those things. And so again, when we recognize that we've been through trauma, It doesn't mean that we're definitely going to have post-traumatic stress disorder and we should just give up. Research shows that post-traumatic growth is possible. And I've heard lots of folks say that, the pandemic taught me what really mattered. It taught me to prioritize my mental health, or it showed me how to connect with my relationships, or it taught me new things about my job, or it gave me new shifting priorities. So there are good things that can come out of trauma, but we also need to make sure that we don't just leave it untended, because, the longer we leave things, I've seen this a lot in my work as a therapist, if we let things go, it gets worse. So think of like if I had a little tear on my sweater, if I mend it up and I take care of it, it's not going to tear wide open. But, if it tears wide open, it's going to be a lot harder to repair. Or if you have like, an infection, a small infection in your foot, and you don't take care of it, it could get very serious. So the same is true for our mental health when we've gone through trauma. Now, again, I want to just a call to action for everyone. Work really hard to relentlessly co-create, shared creation of psychological safety. Again, creating a sense of belonging, of trust, of togetherness, not othering, that we can be ourselves, that we can know we matter, that who we are matters, and a lens of compassion. We're not here to judge each other. Lots of us are going through really, really serious circumstances. So working to not judge. Now, two more final things. One is that peer support. This is a big thing in Active Minds we talk about. And sometimes when we hear the word peer, we think teenagers or college students, but peer support across the lifespan, all the way through, matters. And it's hard as we get older, we lose friends, people move away. It just becomes more complicated. Our kids grow up and they move away, and we might find ourselves in that category of loneliness. So if right now you're a person who's listening and you feel lonely, it might be that you feel misunderstood or left behind. Reach out, reach out in your community, look for places you can go and build friendships, and, look for people that have interesting perspectives and, things to share, and that, you might have shared interests with. Look for those relationships, because they really can be the game changer with our mental health. And then the last point of today, I've emphasized throughout, is moving from me to we. Practicing human reverence, just complete awe and gratitude for each other, especially for anyone with a marginalized or underrepresented identity, whether BIPOC or LGBTQ, anyone that has really been, hurt or discriminated against. How do we really just hold space and show loving kindness and compassion? And then, how do we use universal precautions to mental health, knowing that we all are suffering and it's not always obvious. We can't always see mental health issues. So just treating people with kindness as if they really need that kindness. And same for ourselves. Sometimes we're hardest on ourselves. And then finally, the construct collective efficacy, really moving from me to we, really trying to protect ourselves and one another. So with all that, this is one of the greatest opportunities that I've had to present, to you in Clinton County, wherever you're situated, whether you're tuning in live today when it's being recorded, or a ways down the line, or you're watching some of the other Active Minds content. This is a moment where we have come together to really stand strong and say that you're not alone if you're suffering, and help helps, and help is within reach. And, I'm just so honored. And I invite you, if you are on social media, to connect with me at The Real Dr. Chris. My website is kristenlee.com, KRISTENLEE.com. If you Google Dr. Chris mental health, Dr. Chris reset, Dr. Chris active minds, it would probably also come up. And if you're a reader or you'd like to become a reader, my most recent book, Worth the Risk, just won a Nautilus Book Award. They're called Better Books for a Better World. And it was also nominated a Next Big Idea Club Award for 2022. And then I've got two other books, but these books are written from my heart. Worth the Risk was written during the pandemic. And, it's really from my heart to yours. My book is just like how I've spoken today. It's filled with a lot of research and science, but hopefully, just you can see that I really care and I mean what I say about mental health, and from my own lived experiences and from all the work I've done in the last 30 years, I really have seen such amazing stories of resilience and recovery And I want to encourage you to reach out, leverage those protective factors in your life, and know that, again, you can find your way even when it feels impossible at times. Resilience is something that you're wired for, and that you can own that effervescence you have, that indomitable spirit, that you really are much stronger than sometimes you think. And that just reaching out and forming community around this very important topic can make a world of difference. It can change a life and it can save a life. So please, please, please scan this code, have a look, connect with me, send me a note. My team and I would love to hear from you. And, Active Minds, we'd also just love to connect. So lastly, I want to just provide some different other resources through Active Minds. There's a suicide and crisis lifeline 988. You can also text BRAVE to 741-741. We also have Project Wake Up, so you can watch the information there, and just a host of really great resources. So please, if you're watching, take a look, submit a survey on how this experience was for you. We want to know, and we care, and we want to help. So again, thank you so much for your attention. One more time, if you'd like to connect with me, you can do so here or at kristenlee.com. And with that, I just wish you much joy, peace, and momentum, and much well-being. Thank you so much, Beth, and your entire leadership team, for all the effort and the energy you exerted in sponsoring this. And again, it's been such an honor and such a joy to be present with everybody today, and for those who tune in later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chris. We really appreciate you coming and talking with us today. Folks, we'll be adding the resources and links that Dr. Chris shared on the Clinton County website on our resource page, along with the recording of this talk today, so that you can play it and replay it and really sink in the message. Our next video presentation will be Wednesday, July 26th at 2:00 p.m. with David Romano. He's going to focus on men and mental health. We do hope that you'll join us at that time. Thank you so much. Have a great week.